Welcome to the Data, AI, and Everything podcast, where we delve deep into the evolving world of data science and artificial intelligence. In each episode, we engage with leading experts and visionaries who are at the forefront of transforming the landscape of data and AI. Join us as we unravel the complexities and envision the future through the experiences and insights of our distinguished guest.
Welcome to another episode of Unboxed, an open dialogue about data, AI, and quite frankly, truly everything. Now, I'm David Hardoon, and I have the pleasure of being joined in this episode with Pedro Uria-Recio, the author of Machines of Tomorrow and former Chief Analytics and AI Officer of True Corporation. Welcome.
Hey, David, it's a pleasure to see you again and to discuss with you today.
No, excellent. I don't even know where to begin. There's quite a number of areas that, for example, you capture in the book, which I think are absolutely fascinating. But let's take it a step at a time. I wanted to start with one of the areas that I think you've spent quite a bit of your career in, which is the telco space.
Yes.
Now, the reason why I want to ask you this kind of question, or maybe just get your views, is because ultimately, as we all know, or actually, I should say differently, maybe correct me if you think otherwise. No data, no AI, no fuel, no capacity. And with all the potentials and all the challenges that come with it, end of the day, no data, no AI. And when you think of telco from its origin, when its starting point, in end of the day, it is the highway of data. It is the bus that facilitates everything. But it almost feels that it's become a utility. It literally just became the highway. Is that the case? Or is there this kind of almost a renaissance, a regenesis in the telco industry that is thinking or rethinking about how to leverage on data and AI?
You're absolutely right. Telcos across the world have been more and more commoditized, right? So becoming a utility. The telco industry, for the last 20 years or even more than that, has tried, we knew that would happen, and we have tried to move away from that, try to prevent that. That is challenging, is very difficult, right? With the arrival of internet telephony like WhatsApp, Skype, etc., right? So a lot of telcos even started in the late 90s, started investing in startups. But as doing corporate venture building or startup investment as a corporate is very difficult because corporates have the tendency to acquire a startup and then try to manage that startup in a corporate way, which ultimately kills the startup. And there have many examples. There have been many examples of that in the last 20 years, maybe 25 years as well, right? So it is very challenging in the telco industry. Additionally, there is a consolidation of telcos in every country.
Yeah, that's true.
We can talk about Southeast Asia in particular, but it's happening all around the world because the economics are becoming more challenging. So that's why telcos consolidate so that there are less players in each country, right? So whether telcos will remain having an added value beyond just pure connectivity is challenging. I don't know how the future is going to be, but this is challenging. However, telcos are really trying very strong by investing in content, investing in value-added services, etc., with mixed results. Some of them have been more successful or less.
It's interesting, and I can't help by smiling when you say that we don't know how the future may look like, because in a certain degree, that's exactly what you've done in the book.
Yes.
looking at both in the past and the future. So maybe you do have a bit of an oracle, a lens in terms of how the future will be.
So let me tell you about the book, right? Just briefly. The book is called Machines of Tomorrow. So who are the machines of tomorrow? The thesis of the book is that the machines of tomorrow is us, human beings. We are the machines of tomorrow. And why is that? Because humanity, human beings, is interlacing with AI. At this moment, we have mobile phones and we're using mobile phones for everything. The fact that the mobile phone is outside our body is just an anecdote, right? Very soon, there are going to be brain-computer implants that is going to allow us to communicate with a computer directly. Elon Musk is working. It's already been used to modify human DNA. There are already cyborg technologies to make people, stronger. By modifying the DNA, there will be people that will be living longer, be more immune to cancer, etc. So we are going to make AI our body, part of our species. That's one of the most important ideas of this book, but it's not the only one. I'm also talking about the future of education, the future of jobs. AI is going to fundamentally change the job market.
Yeah.
And I'm talking quite a lot about the potential utopian consequences of AI, because obviously AI is going to create a lot of wealth. However, there are also dystopian consequences, because that wealth is not going to be for everyone. Right?
So Pedro, I want to double click on actually a number of the things that you said, because I think they're fascinating. But I have to ask this question, and as someone that in my many years ago, I don't know whether it was foolishly or crazily, also decided to write a book. What drove you to write it?
So I was invited to talk, or I was working on a script for a podcast about the history of AI. I love history. I really love history. And something that very few people have done is explaining AI from a historical perspective.
Yeah.
When each one of the AI breakthroughs that we are having right now, when was it developed? Why was it developed? What happened in AI in the .com? What happened in AI in the great financial crisis? Why things happen in the way they happened, right? So I was preparing a few notes to talk in a podcast about the history of AI, and what started being a few notes finally became a book of 450 pages about the history of AI, which explains what AI is, why AI is so important for human beings, why human beings have been trying to create artificial beings. Now we call them AI. Before it was called different, artificial beings, for centuries.
And Pedro,
it has been an obsession.
One would say that is definitely a few notes, 400 plus pages. That is, it shows also the richness of the richness of the historical aspect, but as well also the underlying possibilities. And you keep on going back to this point about the future of the machines, basically the future of tomorrow, this kind of view of artificial. Okay, I'm using it in that context, but it's actually about us in the end of the day. It's about us as a species, us as a evolutionary point of view.
I am approaching the topic of AI from many angles. Spirituality is one of those angles. History is another one. Technology, I'm explaining the algorithms in detail with a very simple language, but I'm explaining the algorithms. I'm talking about mathematics, talking about history, talking about economics. I am explaining AI from so many angles, because for me, creating artificial beings, creating artificial intelligence, as I was saying before, merging with it, with what is going to happen, is the biggest epic of humanity, right? So I'm taking many angles. Spirituality is one of those angles. Why? Because artificial general intelligence, AGI, creating an entity that is going to be as intelligent as us. If that happens, that will be the most significant religious event in the last 2 million years.
I don't disagree.
So the book has 5 parts. One part about AI, one part about mythology, one part about AI, one part about robotics, one part about the transition, and one part about the very long-term future, the new being, this idea that we merge with super intelligence. Each one of those parts, I am opening it. I'm opening each one of those parts with a quote from a religious leader. And that means really that is the most significant event, right? For me, AI has an spirituality, and that is what we can see in some of the authors that are writing. For example, one of the most famous books about AI is The Singularity is Coming.
Yeah.
The Singularity is Coming. A lot of people are using this kind of language because they are driving parallels with spirituality. And I try to reflect this in the book as one of the angles. Obviously, I have history, I have economics, I have many angles.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring that up. And I don't think it's, I don't think in any of the previous conversations that at least that I've had, it has come up to that extent. But, you know, in a true view, and again, I'm happy to have people have a different perspective. Actually, AI, despite the origin of so-called artificial, so-called creating robotics, is deeply rooted with underlying spirituality, with a deep necessity of understanding ourselves. And what's the best way to understand something? It's by creating,
Replicating.
exactly, it's by replicating. That is the best way to learn. That's the best way to understand. That's the best way sometimes to appreciate.
That's
And
absolutely right. Sorry to just
no, please.
What we have learned by creating artificial neural networks about how our brain works is absolutely amazing. By trying to replicate the neural networks of our brain in an artificial way, our understanding of our own brain becomes much more accurate. And that's what has happened in scientists have realized.
No, it's fascinating. And actually, one of the things that I was trying to understand from the book, and you touch on, and perhaps in a way leans from this point of view of actually this is about us. Now, yes, okay, what I was also about to say, that in a way you're also exemplifying the immense challenges with AI, because it is not one thing. It's not, and a lot of times, implicitly or explicitly, there are organizations, people, regulators, policies, etc., which almost try and create an analogy to a technology, to cloud, to blockchain, to this, to whatnot. But the reality that AI is a construct. It captures within it multiple layers, from a very infra-mechanical to, we were just talking right now, spiritual. But what I wanted to bring up, and I said that kind of, at least with me, to ignite some thoughts that you've touched on the book, is you said something about the rise of artificial creativity. And as I was reading it, I couldn't help myself. Obviously, even though there's naturally a focus about, oh, look at creating music, songs, movies, and it's a very obvious thing, but it's a literal artificial creativity. But I was actually thinking that while the term is being called artificial creativity, is that it's an augmentation to help us be creative. Because one could always argue that however miraculous it may seem, what does one say? That science to some may seem as magic. The source origin of what is creativity, at least for now, can never come from, no matter how sophisticated a machine, because it is a set of underlying principles, it's a set of mathematical views that will follow some underlying logic. And again, I'm deliberately talking from an abstract perspective. Whereas humans, again, there was just a recent paper that even a fragment of the human brain was like 175 terabytes. It's that degree and complexity that ultimately allows us to be creative. So therefore, the artificial creativity is the artificial support to be creative.
The chapter about artificial creativity is the chapter about generative AI. It's the chapter where I described everything that happened from 2017 when the transformers were first published by Google, right? That's what I refer to.
No, absolutely.
Generative AI. Now, that is connected with the future of jobs. In the midterm, how we can use AI to become more creative, or in general, I would say, to help us in our jobs, right? As long as AI is a tool, that means that as long as AI is not a replacement for a human being, and if there is artificial general intelligence, it might be, because by definition, that is something as intelligent as us. So by definition, it's a replacement. So as long as AI can be used as a tool, and as long as the pace of development of AI, the pace of creation of new tools is reasonable for people to keep on track. Things are not happening so fast and the workforce can adapt. If things start happening really fast and people cannot learn it fast enough, maybe you can, but a lot of people will find it very difficult to learn all these things that have happened in the last few years, right? So as long as those things continue, AI will create more jobs than it will destroy. It will destroy some, but it will create more jobs, like it happened with all the technological revolutions in the past, the IT revolution, the industrial revolution, agricultural revolution, all that. However, if at some point AI, the pace of innovation is so fast that 80% of the people cannot learn it fast enough, 80% of the people have to change jobs so fast that they cannot adapt. Or if AI becomes so intelligent that becomes a net replacement for jobs and people start to find it difficult to find jobs. If those two things happen in the future, there might be a problem with jobs. It might be a situation in the mid-long term, not in the short term.
You say jobs, and I fully agree with everything you said, but I'm just wondering, doesn't it go beyond jobs? Doesn't it almost say, because you job, better opportunities, etc., but actually it's better us? because again, I'm thinking to the heart of human nature. And again, I'm generalizing, of course. There will be people at different degrees of the underlying spectrum. When you see something amazing, it pushes you to do more. It pushes you to go, can I do something else? When you show an artist a beautiful piece of art, the artist will go, what can I do different?
Correct.
When you play music to a musician, they would like, how can I interlace it if it's a mixing element or if it's a new composition? So in a way, this capacity, again, for jobs and of a specific kind of dimension in terms of a scope of a role and task, but even for us, it's like a nudge on a societal level.
So you are right. That's why I say in the short term, it's going to push us forward.
Yeah.
However, human beings have limitations. There is so much we can do. We have a biological.
Unless we get to cyberpunk era.
Brain-computer interfaces, modification of the DNA, unless we get into that, which I think is what is going to happen. But humanity or human beings are limited by our biology. So AI is going to push us forward. But if AI goes so far beyond the roof that we cannot continue going forward, that is when there might be a problem, unless our own biology changes, which is one of the things that I'm suggesting. For example, artificial intelligence was used to develop certain aspects of the COVID vaccines. There is designing DNA and the DNA of these mRNA vaccines. Designing DNA is so complex that you need AI to do that. You need actually generative AI to generate how the molecule is going to look like.
Yeah.
So AI has already been used for that. And at some point, it's going to be applied to biology, making people different from what our biology is. Cyborgs, yeah, that is probably going to happen. There are already cyborgs. I talk about that in the book. There are cyborg associations. There are cyborg Olympics. Yes, that interlace, and you mentioned about a polemic aspect, which is the religion side of the religious side of the book. One of the other polemic aspects is that I don't shy away from talking about polemic areas. I'm talking about the AI, the Cold War of artificial intelligence between the United States and China. I'm talking about geopolitics. I'm talking about how wars are going to be in the future with AI. But one of the things that I talk about is basically the fact that if we mix with artificial intelligence, it's going to make us much more likely to survive in the long term than if we don't mix.
Yeah.
And I use a very polemical example, which is the mixing between the native Mexicans when the Europeans arrived in Mexico. You go to Mexico City today, and 60% of the people are mixed. There are a lot of Native Americans in Mexico, and the vast majority of the population is mixed.
Yeah.
You go to the United States, nobody is mixed, and there are no Native Americans, and those that are there are in reserves, right? Why did the Native Americans survive in Mexico and they didn't survive in the United States? Because in Mexico they mixed with the Spaniards.
It's all about integration.
It's all about integration. So mixing, applying AI, not only to our work, but to us. And this is looks like very science fiction. And what I am trying to do in the book is explain the science of that, what has been done so far, why I think from a scientific point of view that is possible. But I also, in order to storylining, I talk about Asimov, I talk about science fiction as well, to give a taste about how that might look like. And then I go to the science and say, actually, these things that Asimov was talking about, it could happen.
He's been pretty good so far in terms of laying the breadcrumbs towards a potential future that some of it has already become a past. But okay, so let me get your views on this one, and perhaps I don't know, I say provocative questions, but what is really provocative? We talk about a potential AI utopia to a certain extent. And yes, there are risks, there are concerns, there are challenges. And as you describe in terms of some historical countries' points of view may have different outcomes. But let's be optimistic. Let's be not optimistic and focus on that AI utopia. If you look at every cultural revolution, genesis, it's been a different set of leaders, different set of people at the front. And I went back and I looked, and in cultural, you literally had the renegades. You had even people with different perspective from a scientific point of view. At one point, industrial, it was the corporate. I don't think there's a right or wrong, but I just, given that you've collected all these notes and obviously the book and experience, who do you think are the ones, or what do you think is the composition of the leaders who would lead us towards the AI utopia and not the AI dystopian?
That's a very complicated question. Let me explain who is leading AI at this moment. There are economies of scale. There are network effects. The bigger or the more used a technology is, or the most used an AI platform is, the more used it will be. So by nature, there are going to be monopolies or oligopolies. There are going to be large technology companies, there are already, that are going to handle this in a quasi-monopoly. It's already happening. Additionally, AI has a characteristic, which is you put two AIs together, because they can communicate. You put two AIs together, and it becomes a bigger AI. That's less like generative adversarial networks work, right? For example, you put two AIs together, it becomes a bigger AI. You put two human brains together, it doesn't become a bigger human being. That means
actually, you put two humans together, get another human.
Yes, but not a bigger one. But not a bigger one. So that basically means that AI is going to be oligopolistic and is going to result in more inequality, right? Because that creation of wealth is going to go to a few hands. It's already happening, right? That is from an economic point of view. From a political point of view, AI companies have been lobbying governments, right? So there is this regulatory aspect. One of the things that people found very surprising when Sam Altman went to the Congress, the US Congress, was that everybody that goes to the US Congress is saying, do not regulate us. But Sam Altman went to the US Congress saying, please regulate us. The contrary. And what I argue in the book is that these companies that are already incumbent are trying to create barriers to entry, right, with governments, right? So that's why I'm saying artificial intelligence is going to create a huge amount of wealth, but not for everyone, right? And now you can think about, people are talking about universal basic income. I explain universal basic income. I explain in the book why I think it's the wrong solution, why I think the universal basic income is just going to generate more inequality, not less. Because at the end of the day, what you are giving people is a paycheck every month so that they continue buying the services of the incumbents. If you want to solve inequality, you need to give them ownership of those companies, not a paycheck. So basically, that's going to create, basically, if there is massive unemployment happening because of mass job replacement, if that happens, UBI, universal basic income, is going to make it possible for these incumbents to continue having revenues, even if they are not employing people. So that's why, so I talk about all these things. Now, if you ask me, what is the kind of leaders that will take us to a more utopian environment? What I argue in the book, and that can be polemic, but the book is polemic. What I argue in the book is that free economics, libertarianism, so liberal policies, where basically people are free to choose their education, free to choose what they use with the money, free to choose what they do in their life. Those kind of countries will be closer to utopia. Those countries where people implement UBI, those countries where there are large monopolies, those countries where information and misinformation is regulated rather than letting people think by themselves. Those are the countries that will be closer to dystopian. That is what I am arguing in this book. And I totally understand that some people will disagree with that, but that's
that's part of just, in my view, a healthy society is discourse. One has to have different views. By the way, as a completely side note, but I couldn't help thinking of when you talk about the paychecks and financial support. I was recently in Baku in Azerbaijan.
with me.
So I was there again, actually. So I was recently again. Yeah, I went there again. I loved it that much. And I was talking to someone locally, and I don't know how the topic came up. And he said, no, the government here doesn't give money. They give a cow, or they give actual work ultimately. And the reason he was giving the example of the cow was because with the cow, they can make milk, they can make a product, they can sell. Because one of the concerns that they had was if it's just money, there's no tangible feeling around it of how do you then grow, how do you sustain it. It's essentially, it's just there, it's consumed and it's done. Whereas when it's a more material element, in this case it was a cow, you can actually get in a situation when you actually have the ability to buy more cows. Now, again, I know this is not applicable for every country and situation, but I thought that was a charming and wonderful idea. So I just wanted to just plug that in when you were talking about that.
That's the whole idea of don't give a fish to system how to fish. The book ends, following your question, the book ends with an epilogue that explains what are the current policies or the current most accepted ways of thinking how we have to handle AI, largely driven from an intellectual point of view by the World Economic Forum. And the epilogue is a critique to those elements about how we are thinking about how to handle AI today and how I propose in the book to handle AI. It's that critique. It's a critique, I have to say, it is a critique against it's a constructive critique about the approach of the current approach of the World Economic Forum and how I think it should be. So I just give you an example, and that example is misinformation and disinformation. The great topic of this month of February was regulating misinformation and disinformation. I don't think it should be regulated. And I give you an example. I think people should have more critical sense. I give you an example. People used to think that watching video, was real because you could not manipulate video. So if you see a politician saying something in video, if you see somebody caught in video, it must be real. Now AI can modify video, so we cannot trust real. We have to be more critical, right? This is the same thing as if you give a film, you take a film, whatever science fiction film, or whatever film, you give a film to somebody that was living 500 years ago, and you show him the film. That person is going to say, this is real. But you know that film is fiction. That films, they tell things that are not real. So that critical thinking is what we have to...
I couldn't agree more. And in fact, it leads back to what I was mentioning earlier about the creativity, is that the irony of the situation, and again, it's a bit of a pendulum swing, is while previously there's been an over-focus, I would argue, on STEM, now there needs to be, perhaps not an over-focus, but there has to be a sufficiently enhanced focus on... It's effectively everything around the acceptance of something as being absolute, because that's the nature. Like, even if you think about a search, how does a search fundamentally work? And again, I don't think it's by evil intent or something. It's just a reality.
Search of what? Search?
A search, literally a search. When you go online and you do a search, if you think about the fundamental premise, back 2000, a search, it would understand your patterns of your search, and it will start to surface up information that it, quote unquote, thinks, if I use that term, that is relevant to you. But that also means that you need to have that critical thinking by saying, no, I'm going to look at the stuff that you don't think is relevant to me because maybe you got something, you missed something. So I completely agree with you. I want to do a quick kind of swing back to maybe not the telco element, but think of it as a picks and shovels, because all of this is built on environment, infrastructure, capabilities. And I was reading something recently, which I thought was really interesting. And I don't know if you've come across it, but I would love to hear your thoughts. So if you think about how, I guess, the large part of the world has been going is about creating these very large cloud infrastructure capabilities, GPUs, et cetera, and whatnot, because saying, look, to create these AI possibilities, you need to have the resources available. And what I've been recently reading, and I think it's been largely, led through China, is they call it AI in a box. And if you think about it, it's like the opposite spectrum, whereby the ability of having a pre-canned capacity and capability of everything that you need to do to run AI, but it literally, you want to think of it as like an edge environment, but it's in a box on-prem. swaying away from the, no, you have to run it on me because you need to have this massive farms of computing, to actually, Pedro, there you go, AI in the box. You can just go ahead and do it yourself on your own.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, what do you think about that?
Okay, so let me explain what is behind that from a geopolitical point of view. The United States in generative AI has been focusing on creating mainly consumer uses of generative AI, consumer-oriented uses of generative AI. At the beginning, China was trying to do the same thing. People in China were trying to do the same. Actually, around the time that ChatGPT was launched, there was a chatbot in China called Ernie that was around similar. What happened? The Chinese government, China being an authoritative regime, obviously wanted to regulate generative AI quite efficiently. If you look at the regulation, there is a sentence in the Chinese text of the regulation saying that generative AI has to be according to the core, I'm quoting, it's not me, I'm quoting, to the core principles of socialism. Right? It has to support the core principles of socialism. Now, what happens if you have a chatbot for consumer applications that is talking to people? The chance that principle is not going to be fully always fulfilled is very large. So the Chinese government very fast put in place a very restrictive control over the large language models. They have to be approved, there is a battery of tests, etc., etc. Something that with a certain distance, the European AI Act is in certain aspects forcibly in those that are more critical. So Chinese people are very entrepreneurial, they are very hardworking. So they say, if it is going to take us months to get our chatbots approved, it's just never going to work. So what they did is they started focusing on corporate applications.
Okay.
Business applications of AI with chatbots, but they don't have those requirements because it's much more unlikely that a chatbot is going to say something inappropriate within a banking environment. They have worked quite a lot on applications of AI for corporate, involving data sharing. Data sharing, I know you talked about that in Baku. I heard your presentation. Data sharing has always been very complicated across companies. So the Chinese companies and the government, of course, have created data exchanges quite successfully. Yes, there is AI and data regulation in China. A lot of people think there is not. There is. But because of this reason, Chinese companies and the Chinese industry is really focusing on corporate and business applications of AI. And I think they're going to be leading there rather than on consumer applications where we see most of the developments in the US, in the Western world. So that idea of having AI in a box that you go to your company and you can run it on premise and blah, blah, that corporate. But by the way, there are US companies also trying to do that. But I'm saying, if you have to generalize, I would say China is more on the corporate side, while the US is probably more on the consumer side for the time being.
No, this is fascinating. And it, again, goes back to the origin. And again, I'll just repeat what you were mentioning earlier and you cover in your book, the multifaceted, multi-dimensions, multi-paths in which this journey will unfold. And Pedro, look, we can keep on going.
We can keep going and going.
And
we didn't talk about war. We didn't talk about, we can keep going and going. Yeah.
I think that one needs to have its own kind of special session.
that one is tough.
It is. But, and by the way, one of my personal views has always been that if there's one area that AI should be banned, is in warfare. But like I said, that could be a separate topic on its own.
But it's unlikely.
I know, of course it's unlikely. I know it's unlikely. I'm just saying that if it should be in that one. So I was, in my back of my head is running through, and if a core attempt of surmising it is as a one-liner is AI is the ultimate test of human potential.
Yes.
Pedro, thank you so very much. This has been a fantastic conversation. And like I said, I'm looking forward to the next one.
Thank you very much. It has been great to talk to you again and to be in your podcast. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And thanks to all the listeners. And I hope you enjoyed the book. I put a lot of care, a lot of work on it together with my co-author. I did it together with another person called Randy McGraw, and I want to mention him as well. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Data, AI, and Everything podcast. Make sure you visit our website at aboitizdatainnovation.com, where you can subscribe to the podcast and find our show notes. If you enjoyed listening,